What happens when you combine two good things? Well, you typically get a great thing, right? Think about two good things you like. I like chocolate. I like ice cream. Combine the two of them and you get an awesome thing, chocolate ice cream. That flavor of ice cream has captivated sweets lovers for a century or more. But what happens when you combine two bad things, like deadly pandemic diseases and house arrest? Well, some argue we get a good thing, like flattening the curve. But as you know, with the good comes the bad, and you really get, a terrible thing. Like the current situation we find ourselves in, where we're just now being freed from house arrest, depending on where you live. And we're scared to death of a powerful disease that has swept the globe, and in addition to that, our economy is in the toilet. And what, pray tell, are the consequences of combining two horrible things, like high inflation and high unemployment? Well, in the 70s, economists discovered that it equates with something even worse, stagflation. High inflation is a bad economic consequence of printing too much money and inflating the money supply. And high unemployment is a result of an economy that can't sustain its current workforce. Well, what if you combine two terrible things? Like, let's say, Zimbabwe-style hyperinflation with 30% unemployment rates. Can you say Venezuela? Or Hyper-Stagflation? What's up, you guys? You're watching BTP Fusion. I'm your host, Derek West. On BTP Fusion, it's our mission to inspire you to take imperfect action on your finances and business through the power of technology. Help us in that mission by pounding that like button and dropping us a comment if you like what we have to say. And especially if you don't like what we have to say. I mean, we're not perfect here, and we appreciate the input from you, our viewers, to help us improve and deliver the content that is needed in today's corona crisis-induced world. But inflation and unemployment, huh? These are not new economic quantifiers. They're really just a measure of the health of an economy. A lot of economists, rightly or wrongly, feel that a certain amount of inflation is good for said economy. It's generally thought to mean that the economy is still increasing and humming along at a good pace. Anywhere from 1% to up to 4% is considered a good range of inflation. At the same time, a lot of economists feel that a certain level of unemployment is a good thing. If your unemployment rate is at 0%. That means that everyone is employed to do something, and that the second someone switches their job, they have another one lined up. But that also means that the cost of doing business, i.e. labor, which is the largest part of many business models, will skyrocket, which is actually a contributor to inflation. But it can also lead to companies being unable to compete in this global economy, and thus close up shop, leading to a cycle of higher unemployment levels. So, similar to inflation, a lot of economists consider full employment to be when the unemployment rate is between 2% and 5%. Unemployment is probably the most easy to understand economic statistic to a layman laborer. It's easy to grasp and understand what it means. It provides a gauge to you as to how successful your neighbors are in general in the larger macroeconomy. Now, a high unemployment rate to you typically means that you as a worker are more likely to stick at your current position because you're not as confident that if you leave for whatever reason, that you'd be able to quickly find another job. It also means in your mind that you're not in a power position at your place of employment, and that you could be laid off at any time. Not a great feeling for anyone, frankly. The mass psychological effect is that you are less likely to shop as well. Since you feel that you're gonna need to save up as much cash as possible, as you simply don't know how long you're gonna have access to regularly flowing income. And the exact opposite is true of times of very low unemployment. With low unemployment, you as a worker feel like you and your neighbors are at least doing all right. Maybe you're not getting rich, but you're definitely getting by. Maybe even a little bit more than just getting by. And you're able to put away money for your kids or your family's future. You don't feel as stuck to a job that maybe you don't like as much. You may be actively looking for other positions as a way to make a little bit more money and to put yourself in an even better position for the future. The mass psychology of low unemployment is that you are likely to shop because you feel your job and your position are secure and that you can afford to quote unquote treat yourself. Now, whether or not these are the right behaviors to exhibit during these times is a topic of a different discussion. But the point is, people can and do feel completely different about themselves and their economic position entirely based on a vague number, regardless of their actual circumstances. And that feeling affects the way they live and their financial habits. The same is true for inflation. Even though inflation is a slightly more vague and opaque economic term, a lot of people have a hard time grasping what inflation actually is and isn't. That isn't until they're in an environment where inflation is too high. At times like this, people can see the prices of goods and services they buy every day increasing rapidly. This gives them the psychological effect of not having faith in the currency that they hold or are getting paid by their job. It gives them a feeling of being poor no matter how hard they work. In other words, The money that they do have in a bank or in their 401ks or being paid to them in their salary is worth less than what they thought it was. And in some cases, it could simply just be worthless. In the opposite circumstance, low inflation gives people confidence in their money. In low inflation environments, people definitely feel like they can save their money and that it will be worth something when they decide to use it. Now, the opposite of inflation is deflation. If you thought inflation was hard to grasp, deflation is even more difficult to grasp. If inflation means that your money is worth less, wouldn't deflation mean that your money is worth more? Well, yeah, actually. That's kind of exactly what it means. But the reason that your money is worth more, in general, the money that you hold is becoming rarer. In other words, there is less and less money circulating in your economy. That has generally not been a problem in a lot of modern and advanced economies, as many economists pinpoint this phenomenon as the reason as why the Great Depression lasted as long as it did, i.e. because the money supply just kept shrinking. And even though the economy wanted to grow in several places, it simply couldn't because people couldn't use money to back their economic activity. In a deflationary environment, similar to a high unemployment environment, and oftentimes they are parallel with each other, you are very fearful of your job and where your next paycheck is going to come from. As you look around you, you see everywhere that people are cutting prices, most likely going out of business. And when that isn't the case, they're cutting prices in a desperate attempt to attract any customers at all to purchase their products. Gasoline, at least for the last couple of months, is going through a bit of a deflationary period. Same thing with airline tickets. You see airlines and cruise ships and people in general are large gasoline and oil purchasers. And they're simply not able to buy as much of it as they used to due to reduced demand for their services and just people not driving as much as they were since they've all been under house arrest. You know, they've been quarantined, so they aren't driving around as much as they used to. Meaning that demand for gasoline and thus oil is suppressed. And when demand is depressed, so are the prices. So high inflation is bad and has a bad effect on the mass psychology of the populace. Same thing with high unemployment. What happens when both of those phenomena happen at the same time? Well, we know the answer to that because that exact thing happened during the 1970s in the United States. In the 1970s, the unemployment rate was rather high, averaging 7.9% and peaking at a yearly basis at over 8.2%. Add to that the inflation rate doubling from around 4% in 1972 to 8.8% in 1973. By the end of the decade, the inflation rate was at 14%, a rate which was almost unheard of in American economic history, certainly since the early parts of the 20th century. To curb this, it took brutal economic policies, including double-digit interest rates, up to 20%, to get inflation under control. And because of that, an acceptance that the economy would have to go through a recession to pay for all the good times. Those high interest rates meant that interest rate sensitive industries like housing and automobiles would have to go through very hard times, until such a time as interest rates hit their low single-digit rates that we're used to today. So what happens when you get hyperinflation plus high unemployment? That is sustained unemployment levels of greater than 10%, i.e. 15, 20, or 30% unemployment rates. Well, you run into an economic condition that I like to refer to as hyper-stagflation. Take the hyper from hyperinflation and stagflation, the economic malaise that occurred in the US in the 1970s, and combine the two, and you have hyper-stagflation. Well, it's just as bad as it sounds. You have a currency that is essentially worthless, and the authorities who issue it simply keep the printing presses going, because all of the promises that they made to their constituencies couldn't be paid otherwise, simply because the revenues don't exist to do it. More than likely, those are just direct payments to individuals and favored businesses to keep them running. The businesses that aren't as favored will more than likely continue to fall further and further behind. High unemployment means that people have a ton of time on their hands to engage in esoteric discussions about the political situations that they're facing. And they typically fall in one of two camps. They either really support the current regime or really dislike it. And where you fall into those camps depends on whether or not you're on the payroll of the regime, more than likely. And if you're able to get access to the cash first before it has a chance to circulate in the economy and inflate the prices of those needed goods and services. And that typically leads to an us versus them mentality and to a ton of civil unrest where anti and pro-government forces duke it out in the streets. Do we have any examples of a hyper-stagflated economy? Yes, we do. Venezuela. Now, depending on who you ask, Venezuela's unemployment rate was anywhere from 8% to 44.3% in 2019. I'll put links to articles and charts making a case for both numbers, but based on poverty and GDP numbers, I suspect that the rate was closer to 44 than it was to 8. You, of course, have to make your own decision. Let us know what you think in the comments down below. But add to that, the inflation rate in Venezuela was 10, wait for it, million% in 2019. So that means if you purchased a stick of gum for $1 on January 1st, 2019, that same stick of gum would have cost you $10 million on January 1st, 2020. Of the people that are employed in Venezuela, most of them cannot afford to purchase a single gallon of milk. Can that happen here? Yes. Yes, it can. It can happen anywhere. You see, inflation, more so than anything else, is really a function of the monetary supply. The monetary supply tends to be in the hands of politicians, and politicians love getting reelected. So it can be very tempting, as an example, to print tons and tons of cash and hand it out to constituents who are suffering during bad economic times. Bad economic times that were caused by lousy decisions. Decisions such as shutting down the entire economy by putting people under house arrest, forcing the closure of millions of businesses and the losses of livelihoods. Will it happen here? Well, that is something that I don't think I can predict. In fact, I don't think anybody can predict that. A lot of people suspect that it will. That's sort of like expecting a recession, however. At the start of this year, nobody really knew what was going to cause the next big recession. Was it going to be A, an overvalued industry sector like the dot-com bubble that suddenly was priced correctly, causing a domino effect for industries around it? Or was it going to be B, poorly capitalized banks and insurance companies holding overvalued assets like credit default swaps, as people realized just how worthless they truly were, due to the fact that the loans that those credit default swaps were representing were not being paid? Or could it be a virus that no one has ever heard of, that is so deadly that creatures that have it need to be quarantined for an indefinite amount of time, locking up businesses and individuals? At the beginning of the 1970s, nobody expected a high inflationary cycle as a result of monetary policy. Now, in this particular crisis, it could be the case that the loss of economic activity could easily offset the money printed and handed out. In fact, a lot of people might argue that is exactly the case, as highlighted by the fact that the Small Business Fund, or whatever they called it, ran out exceptionally fast and had to be re-upped pronto to prevent masses of businesses failing and leaving even more workers unemployed. Others are saying, and rightly so, that this level of money printing is unheard of in American economic history, and thus is likely to follow other money printing sprees in other countries. The truth is, I don't know. What about you? Do you think this period of stimulus and bailouts is likely to lead to a period of hyperinflation plus high unemployment, leaving the United States in a position much like that of Venezuela? Leave us a comment with your thoughts, and be sure to like this video if you liked this video, and click the subscribe and notification bells, as more great videos just like this one are coming out weekly. I have linked articles on this topic in the description with references to important points that I have made, so be sure to check them out if and when you have a chance. I just wanted to also drop a big thanks as well. To all my subscribers so far, as we've just hit 1,000 subs earlier this month. It might not seem like much, but it means a lot to me. As you see, I started this channel as a way to alleviate some boredom, cultivate even more skills than I already have, to talk about topics that I felt were underrepresented, and to provide my perspective on what it takes to be successful in business and in life, as well as overcoming a little bit of stage fright. And it's turning into something that even I couldn't predict. But with that, I'll close by saying that a goal without a plan is a wish. A goal with a plan and no action is a wish list. I hope I've inspired you to take imperfect action on your business and your personal finances using the power of technology. We'll catch you next time. Take it easy. Peace.